I want to end this lecture by considering two final schools in psychology that focus almost exclusively on conscious mentality: functionalism and Gestalt psychology. In looking at functionalism, I'm going to focus primarily on William James. Now, most historians consider James the first figure in the first school of psychology in the United States. But functionalism, much like pragmatism, the philosophical movement with which he's also associated, really has no central figure, or for that matter, much of a clear-cut doctrine. However, functionalists do have several general common commitments. Functionalism also overlaps significantly with both structuralism and behaviorism. James's work, Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, actually predates by 2 years Titchener's arrival at Cornell. Principles makes James as famous and widely studied as Wundt, and indeed, functionalists make important criticisms and contributions to other schools of psychological thought. What sort of general commitments do functionalists share? Well, they tend to oppose the search for basic elements of thought, which characterizes Wundt and Titchener's view. In fact, in Principles, James portrays mentality as a stream of consciousness, incapable of analysis into elements. Functionalists, in contrast to voluntarists and structuralists, think of the mind as dynamic and serving a function. Functionalists, in contrast to voluntarists and structuralists, think of the mind as dynamic and serving a function. The function of the mind is linked to evolution for functionalists. Thus, unlike the rather rigid determinism of structuralism and behaviorism, functionalists tend to emphasize adaptation and differential responses driven by motivation. Thus, they tend to accept both introspection and behavioral responses as methodological tools for exploring the nature of the mind. They also support psychological research on animals, children, and abnormal populations as a means to understanding normal human cognition. Unlike Wundt, who views psychology's mission as pure basic research, functionalists tend to see psychology as a means to improve society and people's lives. Early functionalists, like James, do little by way of experimentation. Though James founds a lab, it seems primarily to serve as an instructional resource. Functionalism, like Gestalt psychology, contributes to the development of cognitive psychology more indirectly than through successful theory. Functionalists offer important criticisms of both introspectionist frameworks as well as behaviorism. They expand the scope of data accumulation as well as introduce a greater emphasis on interdisciplinary and intradisciplinary convergence in theory and experimental methodology. Max Wertheimer founds the School of Gestalt Psychology, or the Berlin School, with his two research assistants, Kurt Kafka and Wolfgang Kohler. The emphasis of Wertheimer's work is the study of perception, particularly the rules by which perceptual inputs are organized into meaningful wholes. He articulates the central doctrines and insights of Gestalt psychology in his classic paper, The Laws of Organization and Perceptual Forms. In general, the Gestalt psychologist's work marks a shift in the study of perception away from purely physiological and psychophysiological models towards more of a cognitive model. Wolfgang Kohler contributes to the development of Gestalt psychology. However, his book, The Mentality of Apes, makes his greatest contribution to the development of cognitive science. In his book, he describes the behavior of various chimpanzees at the Prussian Academy of Sciences, an anthropoid research station. He notes that these animals seem to learn by insight and problem solving more than by Thorndike's trial and error. In a classic experiment, Kohler would hang bananas just out of reach for the monkeys in the open yard, and they would, many times, he noted, gain insight into how to get at the bananas by realizing that they could, for instance, stack up boxes or use a stick that was out there to elevate themselves high enough to be able to get those bananas. Now, Gestalt psychologists contribute to the development of cognitive science in two ways, really. First, Gestalt psychology marks a shift in the study of perception, away from pure physiology and psychophysiology towards the cognitive. But secondly, Gestalt psychologists argue that insight and problem solving drive behavior as much as classical and operant conditioning. Therefore, Gestalt psychologists influence less through theory than through an ever-increasing body of perceptual and learning phenomenon that resist explanation by other introspective techniques or by the reflexive techniques of the behaviorists.